Alright lads, so Sony has finally released a trailer for Spider-Man Brand New Day, and I'm here ready to reveal some mind-boggling Easter eggs and hidden details. This will be the longest video I've ever made. Just like this is the first Spider-Man trailer in a decade that truly feels like a solo Spider-Man movie. Peter is alone, miserable, and still fights for people who cannot fight for themselves. Then he comes back to an empty apartment and he uses a shitty washer and leans against it with bruises and wounds all over his body. Spider-Man is us. Spider-Man is me. And I cannot emphasize it enough that this might be the most comic-accurate Spider-Man movie that we're gonna get on the big screen. After you're done watching this video, you'll realize why I say this. Now, I have watched the trailer at 0.25x speed, actually maybe even slower than that for some frames, and found as many visual details as I could. So buckle up, sit back, and enjoy this video. But let's please spare me just 2 minutes to thank today's sponsor, ZocDoc. Alright, so let me be real for a second. When you spend your life editing at 2 AM, going frame by frame at 0.25x speed, surviving on late-night notes and questionable sleep routines, you start thinking a bit more about your health. Not kidding, I'll notice something random, tell myself I'll book an appointment, and then I just don't. Why? Because calling around, sitting on hold, not knowing who's actually good, it's a proper hassle. And finding the right doctor, not just any doctor, genuinely matters. You want someone who feels like a fit, someone who actually listens. That's why I've been using today's paid partner, ZocDoc. Here's how it works. First, it's a free website where you can find and book high-quality in-network doctors. We're talking more than 150,000 providers across all 50 states. Second, you can search by specialty or even by symptom, whether that's dermatology, dentistry, primary care, eye care, or 200 plus other specialties. You can build a care team that's right for you. Third, you can choose what fits your vibe. In person, great. Video visit, also sorted. And you can read thousands of verified patient reviews, so you get a real sense of who you're booking with. For instance, I chose my doctor based on what mattered to me. One of my primary issues I had in the past is that doctors wouldn't give me as much time or pay attention. But with ZocDoc, it's different. Not only do they listen to each of my problems, but they really do care about me, which makes all the difference in the world to me. And when you're ready, you see their real-time availability and just click to book. No phone tag, no waiting around. Now, appointments made through ZocDoc typically happen within 24 to 72 hours, sometimes even the same day. So instead of doom-scrolling symptoms at 11 p.m. like a madman, you can actually book a real in-network doctor before your head hits the pillow. Be kind to yourself this year, lads, and using ZocDoc is free. So visit my sponsor at ZocDoc.com/CanadianLad to find and instantly book an appointment with a top-rated in-network doctor today. Alright, now let's get straight to the breakdown. The trailer opens with Peter Parker sitting upside down over the New York skyline and looking at his phone. Notice how Tom Holland's veins pop up as he prepares to get off this ledge. If I flip this scene and see it from our perspective, it looks even more insane. There are probably safety wires attached to him, but judging by the veins popping up, that still takes a crazy amount of physical strength to pull off, even if it looks like a simple movement on screen. Now, from what we can see on his phone, it looks like Peter is checking in on both Nad and MJ through their Instagram reels, where Nad's username is thegratefulnad42, and he has 2,800 followers. But the amount of likes and shares on his post is honestly crazy for that follower count. And usually, this is the spot where you would see your own profile picture, but that's a default icon there, meaning Peter Parker's Instagram account has no profile photo. Now notice how they deliberately frame Peter's wrists in a way that makes sure we can clearly see the mechanical web shooters. Why? So that if and when Peter does evolve into getting organic webbing, we catch that too. I'll explain it more when I get there. Now notice this shot where we see Peter holding his phone has a scaffolding in the background, which means he isn't exactly on a very tall rooftop like the trailer implies. It's actually more plausible that Peter is on top of this crane, monitoring real-time crime reports on his phone, and checking Nat's social media happens in a different scene. So chances are they put together two different sequences and made it look like one. We then hear a police siren go off and Peter puts the mask back on and goes back to being Spider-Man. He leaps off the skyscraper and for the first time in the MCU, we can actually see the suit and the mask reacting to the wind. Previously, his nanosuits would never react to any force of wind. The VFX team added this in to indicate this suit is hand-stitched by Peter himself. And the way he just free falls without even looking, it shows us just how broken Peter Parker is on the inside. Imagine the love of your life and your best friend who no longer has any memories of you are posting videos on social media saying they've never been happier, while Peter here is all alone. The way he dives, it almost appears as if he doesn't want to catch himself back. Like part of him just wants to let go. But he's also Spider-Man, and the show must go on. This is our first indication that Peter is slowly forgetting his human side and only focusing on being Spider-Man, which might be what causing his DNA mutation. I'll explain it more when I get there. And then we get a close-up view of Peter Parker's eyes, this time from inside the mask. But what I really love here is that the trailer removes all background score and only leaves us with Peter's heavy breathing. This shows us what those few seconds before a fight actually feel like behind the mask. Now I know some people are complaining that this angle makes no sense, saying Spider-Man's mask should be skin tight, so there shouldn't be enough space for a shot like this. But that's exactly the problem. You're limiting the filmmaker here. If a director wants to use his creative liberty and basically shrink us down inside the mask to give us a perspective from a space that technically doesn't exist, we should still accept it. Because sometimes a visually impossible shot can still communicate an emotion perfectly. Interstellar is a prime example of that. Also, I don't think director Destin Daniel Cretton filmed this scene only to make the film more cinematic. I think there's a very specific reason behind this, and that is, later on in the trailer, we see Peter's eyes turning black. So by placing so much focus on his eyeballs early on, Destin is basically training the audience to pay attention to them, so that when that change starts happening, we immediately feel something is wrong. We cut to Peter's apartment, where Peter is sitting alone, drinking coffee, and reading the letter he originally wrote for MJ back in No Way Home. Notice how he's again wearing the mechanical web shooters, even though he's not in the suit. This is again to remind the audience that this version of Peter does not have organic webbing yet. Now in No Way Home, we only heard a couple of lines from this letter that Peter was rehearsing before trying to speak to MJ. But in this movie, we get a full view of the letter, and that's what we keep hearing in Tom's voice throughout the trailer. And this is what he wrote. "Hi, my name is Peter Parker, and you don't remember me, but I have something to tell you that's gonna sound crazy, but it's the truth. And I know you're gonna believe me because you're very good at telling when I'm lying. We used to know each other, we worked together, but something bad was gonna happen to the world, and the only way to stop it was to make everyone forget me, including you. Because I'm not just Peter Parker, I'm Spider-Man. And sometimes Spider-Man has to do the hard thing, even if it breaks Peter Parker's heart. Maybe I'll never read this to you, maybe I'm just writing this for me. Maybe that's my responsibility, to live alone with the truth. But the truth is, I love you. And I hope that deep down, something inside you remembers you love me too." Oh boy, reading that out loud made me choke up a bit. We then see Peter sitting alone in what looks like a small diner or a shop, and it might actually be the same place MJ used to work at in No Way Home. He glances back and sees Ned. But the important detail here is what's sitting on the table in front of him. A bouquet of pale peach roses, still wrapped up in plastic. And a little later in the trailer, we see MJ placing the same flowers on a water vase on her kitchen counter. So my guess is Peter bought those for MJ. Maybe he's thinking about approaching her again. Maybe part of him still hopes he can somehow make her fall in love with him all over again. We then see Peter washing his Spider-Man suit in one of those terrible washer-dryer combo machines that landlords always advertise like, yeah, don't worry, the building has laundry. Man, if you just think about it for a moment, Peter, who used to be this middle-class genius kid, just getting by with Aunt May, he became Spider-Man at the age of 15 and eventually things improved. The guy he looked up to became his mentor, almost like a father figure, enabling him to use multi-billion-dollar tech. He always had people in his life making sure money and resources were never really a problem. But now Tony is gone, Happy doesn't remember him, MJ doesn't remember him, and Aunt May is gone too. To go from unlimited resources to being broke, to go from charging his nanotech suit in his room, to now washing his hand-stitched suit in a crappy washing machine, our Peter Parker has really come a long way. And that is depicted perfectly by him leaning against a washer with bruises all over his body. And this is precisely why Spider-Man will forever be the greatest superhero to ever exist. He fights evil that we wish to fight in real life. And then he comes back to his shitty apartment and does the laundry himself. He is truly one of us. And this close-up shot of his mask getting washed is exactly what makes him different from all the billion other superheroes. Cut to Spider-Man receiving the key to New York City being handed to him by Sheila Rivera? So does this confirm that Mayor Wilson Fisk will lose his position by the end of Daredevil Born Again Season 2? But why would Fisk's own advisor be the one stepping in here instead of someone from the opposition party? Does this mean Kingpin is still pulling the strings? It does create a distinct contrast between the two though. Mayor Fisk formed an entire anti-vigilante task force to bring an end to all superheroes in the city, while Sheila is standing here publicly honoring one of them. But one detail that I just cannot get out of my head is Peter sitting alone in his apartment with a goddamn key to the city, and there's not a single person there to celebrate with him or even tell him that he did a great job. And notice the injuries on his face here. He got cuts on the right eyebrow, a bruise on the nose, a mark on his right cheek, even damage around the lower lip. I love how Destin then slowly focuses on the key to the city to show us that achievements like these mean nothing when the people you love aren't there to share it. Then comes this rooftop shot. Now let me tell you something that I noticed that most people will brush off in a second. When Spider-Man jumps from this rooftop by sliding above this unit, notice how he rotates his body mid-air to generate momentum and speed. It's such a tiny movement, but it adds so much beauty and realism to this shot, because these kind of shots are almost always fully CGI, and the fact that the VFX team went out of their way to add this extra spin really makes this shot look incredible. And whenever VFX artists put that kind of effort into a shot, I take it as my job to appreciate it, and that's why I make this kind of videos. And then we get to the scenes which were all filmed practically in Glasgow. And because the sequences were shot in real locations, rather than just being built entirely inside a computer, we can now actually see the texture on Spider-Man's suit. We can literally spot the wrinkles, the folds, the way the material reacts under movement and light. Even the behind-the-scenes footage from this Glasgow shoots looked stunning, before CGI was even added. So it's no surprise that the final result looks this beautiful. Get this, if you're building something entirely from scratch using CGI, chances are it might look a bit video gamey. But if you shot something practically and then use CGI to enhance it, it's gonna look almost real. Now in this sequence, it looks like Spider-Man is chasing this armored vehicle, and whoever is inside is not firing directly at him. They're actually aiming at his webbing so that he loses grip and falls. We then see Spider-Man standing in the middle of an empty street and gets slammed by a black van being driven by none other than Frank Castle, aka the Punisher. What's interesting is that a regular human being would get crushed by that van going at that speed. But notice in slow motion, we can actually see Spidey's enhanced strength lets him absorb the impact and remain upright. Now judging by their interaction here, it's safe to assume both Spider-Man and Frank have spoken before. This is not their first interaction. And that's why Spider-Man was really pissed when Frank hit him with the van. Also, I think the dynamic between Spidey and Punisher is gonna be phenomenal. The fact that they're both annoyed by each other already, I love that. Now let me reveal another incredible attention to detail. Notice when Frank aims his shotgun at Spidey, Spidey quickly zaps the barrel of the gun with his web. But Frank still ends up pulling the trigger. So does it mean Frank meant to kill Spidey? No. Because Frank knows exactly how durable and strong Spider-Man's webbing is. He knows that once that barrel is webbed up, the shot is not gonna hit with full force. Even if Spider-Man doesn't completely dodge it, it's not gonna behave like a normal shotgun blast. And here's the detail I found. When the muzzle flash goes off, notice we can still see the webbing attached to the fired shot. In fact, a little bit of webs get stuck to the windshield before landing on Spidey's chest. This webbing is what basically reduces the impact and stops the blast from penetrating Spider-Man's chest. So instead of killing him, it sends him flying off the van and launches him across the street, where he crashes right under the armored vehicle he was originally chasing. That's a ridiculous attention to detail, eh? In the very next shot, we see Spider-Man standing on top of this armored vehicle, pulling on his webbings with full force because he's about to use them like a slingshot and catapult himself straight through the windshield of Punisher's van. Now at 0.25x speed, you can actually see how he adjusts his body mid-air by extending his left leg forward, and once he crashes through the windshield, he kicks the passenger seat, grabs Frank by the shoulder, and yanks him out of the van. Had Spider-Man gone about it the other way around and just kicked Frank straight out of the van, that easily could have broken a few of Frank Castle's bones, but he doesn't do that. So even though both of them are clearly attacking each other, you can tell they're still pulling their punches. Now as Frank is about to say the F word, Spidey zaps him up, and I'm pretty sure this is how they're gonna censor him throughout. We then cut to the housewarming party at MJ's place, and if I zoom in on this beer keg, notice it's labeled Green Jackal. Now, Punisher's first ever comic appearance was in The Amazing Spider-Man number 129, and that same issue also featured the debut of Jackal, where he tried to manipulate the Punisher into killing Spider-Man. So I'm betting we will see the Jackal in this film in some shape or form. Or he might end up being the true villain. We see MJ now has a new boyfriend who might either be Paul Ribben from the comics or Miles Warren, aka the Green Jackal, who's already teased. Why Miles? Because in the comics, Miles Warren, aka the Jackal, does fall in love with Gwen Stacy. So the same could happen, but with MJ. Let me know what you think about this. Cut to Peter's laundry room where he's bleeding from his right ear and is sweating like hell. Now if you take a look at his eyeballs, they're turned turning black. And this is our first visual clue that Peter is mutating. Tom's voiceover says, "What is happening to me?" And Peter collapses on the ground. Now keep in mind, we have never seen Peter Parker just collapse like this, unless he's been attacked, injured, or pushed in the middle of a fight. Then he wakes up inside a cocoon. And this is where we realize Peter is slowly losing control over his own webbing. Because the way he wakes up and finds himself wrapped in all that web indicates he did all of this being unconscious. So slowly, Peter is going through a full-blown metamorphosis and becoming the man-spider. Just like in the comics, where the mutation gets so extreme that he literally grows extra arms. In simpler words, Peter's DNA is split between two sides, his actual human DNA and the spider DNA inside him. And what this trailer seems to be suggesting is that the spider side is slowly taking over, meaning Peter is becoming more spider than human. But at the same time, there's also a strong possibility that Marvel and Sony are not adapting Man-Spider directly and are instead borrowing from the other storyline. Because if you think about it, the classic Man-Spider story doesn't come with all these exact elements. He doesn't get these enhanced power upgrades. He doesn't get the spider-like black eyes. And there isn't really any cocoon in that storyline. All of these details point much more toward the other. Now the problem is, adapting the other exactly as it is from the comics would be very difficult in a PG-13 Spider-Man movie, especially because of how much violence is baked into that storyline. So my theory is they're gonna merge elements from Man-Spider and the other, and create something entirely brand new for this film, quite literally. Meaning, Peter could receive the exact power enhancements associated with the other, but at the same time, the mutation becomes so unstable and so visually disturbing that he desperately wants an antidote before he fully turns into something monstrous, something very close to Man-Spider. Personally, I'm not that big of a fan of Spider Totem or the other storyline. I'd much rather prefer the Man-Spider plot, and I think that's exactly what we're gonna get. Now notice, when he's waking up in the cocoon, his left hand looks way darker than his right one. Now yes, you could argue that's just a shadow or the lighting, but the same logic should apply to his right hand too, and that one looks completely normal. So does that mean the mutation is already spreading beyond his eyes? Because if his eyes are turning black, then it's not crazy to think that the rest of his body might slowly be changing too. And Bruce Banner himself makes it very clear that DNA mutation can be extremely dangerous. So it goes without saying that Peter is probably about to go through some massive biological changes. And notice how Peter tries to thwip without his web shooters, and looks genuinely surprised when nothing comes out. Now ask yourself this, why would he even try to thwip his webs without the shooters? That means by this point in the movie, he has already developed organic webbing in some capacity. And when it suddenly doesn't work here, that's exactly why he looks shocked. And then just as he's about to fall, the webbing finally kicks in. And here we can clearly see he has no web shooters, but he still manages to catch himself mid-air, therefore confirming that Peter will indeed get organic webbing in this film. We then see Spider-Man getting a full body scan, and the display says radiation detection. So this is probably a test being carried out by Bruce Banner. And here's what I think is gonna happen here. Peter will sneak in disguising himself as an Empire State University student and tell Banner that he's friends with Spider-Man, who's having problems with his DNA mutation. And then Banner will ask him to bring his friend to his lab, where he will do some tests and figure out what's going on. The reason I believe this test is being run by Banner is because the Avengers are known to label superheroes as enhanced humans.
We have an enhanced in the field.
And here, Spider-Man is clearly designated as exactly that, an enhanced human. Also, the fact that Spidey seems to be participating in this scan willingly tells me this has to be someone he trusts. The scan also picks up several of his abilities, including Superior Strength Class B, Superior Agility Class C, Enhanced Senses, and Enhanced Perception, both with Class A. And the machine goes even further by showing that the integrity of the data is 96%, while the confidence lock on the subject is 92%. But there's one slight discrepancy here. The fact that the machine uses all these fancy class-based categories for power levels makes me wonder if the scanner was originally designed for something even more dangerous or more powerful, like a mutant. And then there's another detail that complicates things even more. The scan appears to be operated by someone called Agent Ramirez, and that raises an important question. If this really is Bruce Banner's lab, then why would Banner need an agent to run the test for him? Which is why there's also a very real possibility that this isn't Banner's setup at all. The test could actually be conducted by the Department of Damage Control, and Spider-Man may have come here willingly in an attempt to prove he's not a threat. That said, I still think bringing Bruce Banner into a Spider-Man movie where Peter Parker is slowly turning into a monster is an absolutely genius move. Now notice how Bruce is still wearing the same inhibitor device we saw him use in She-Hulk to keep himself in human form.
I made this little device which keeps me in human form.
Now, who's to say this device is gonna remain intact for the whole film and keep him that way forever, eh? We then see Spider-Man holding his head with both hands, almost as if something inside him is going terribly wrong, or maybe some external force is starting to mess with his mind. I really believe mental health, anxiety, and depression are gonna be a major part of this film, because our boy Peter has already lost almost everything. And now on top of all that emotional damage, his own body seems to be turning against him too. Peter suppressed his human side so much that it literally created a biological mishap inside his body. Being Peter means missing MJ, means living without May, and that's why Peter is trying to bury his human side. I wouldn't be surprised if the final battle he fights in this film is against himself, his own spider DNA, where he has to remind himself that Peter Parker is just as important. Then we cut to this next shot, which looks very similar to his laundry room. So my theory is this is probably Peter's own little personal lab, the place where he works on his suit and is now trying to investigate what exactly is happening to his mutation. And because Peter clearly has very limited resources now, I'm pretty sure this setup won't be enough for him to solve the problem on his own. Which is why I think this is eventually what pushes him toward approaching Dr. Banner for help. Also, notice the way Peter keeps looking around the room, almost confused by what he is seeing. That makes me think this might actually be the first time where he realizes he has developed organic webbing, meaning all those webs we see plastered across the lab may have been weaved by Peter subconsciously and he doesn't remember doing it. Now let's break down this shot. Here Peter is wearing his full Spidey costume, but notice there's no web shooters on his wrists, and yet we can still see webbing on his hands. So my guess is this is Spider-Man trying to figure out how his organic webs actually work. I mean, take a look at the way his own webbing pulls him forward, or this scene where he thwips his webs at the back of this billboard and completely loses control. He has been Spider-Man for nearly a decade, and it's not normal that he suddenly forgot how his webbing works, which again proves this is not his old mechanical webbing. He's still getting used to this new form of webbing, and judging by how violently it keeps pulling him around, I'm pretty sure this organic webbing is far more powerful than the mechanical kind he built himself. His normal web shooters would have never dragged him this hard, so the very thing that's making him stronger is also making him lose control. So yeah, these two shots are probably showing Peter slowly learning how to handle his newfound powers. I also love how this pigeons get stuck to his body because of his organic webbing, which is also taken directly from the comics. Now I did a side-by-side comparison between his mechanical webbing and his organic webbing, and the difference is actually pretty interesting. His manufactured webbing looks very clean, very controlled, almost perfect, which makes sense because Peter designed that web fluid himself, so of course it reflects his own precision. But when you look at the organic webbing, it looks messier, more chaotic, more irregular in its patterning, and yet at the same time it looks more natural, more alive, almost as if it has a life of its own. So hats off to the VFX team here. They've really managed to visually separate the two. Then we get a random shot of this metal tap with a single drop of water falling into a bucket. And I think this is the trailer hinting that Peter's powers are evolving beyond what he's used to. He already had enhanced senses before, but now those senses may be becoming even more heightened. So this water droplet could be a way of showing that Peter is now perceiving tiny details from far away with absurd clarity. Then we cut to this massive white facility, where we see a glass-walled living area covered in dark wooden panels. And right in the middle of it, someone is strapped into a chair. Now, based on the set photos, this has to be Sadie Sink's character, because the outfit matches and so do the boots. But what's interesting is that whoever held her captive here, they didn't throw her into some dirty prison cell. This space actually looks weirdly comfortable. There's a bed, a desk, books on the shelves, speakers for music, a beanbag, and even roller skates. All these indicate towards the DODC, because only a government-run facility could provide you with all of this while still keeping you imprisoned. Then we see a massive explosion, and I think this is happening just outside this same facility, as we can see some medical personnel as well as someone in a hazmat suit. If Sadie Sink is indeed playing Jean Grey, then my theory is that she might be psychically controlling people from a distance and guiding them toward this location, creating chaos outside this facility, and essentially creating an escape route for herself. And then there's this huge hole in the building. It is so massive that it makes me wonder whether we could be looking at a Hulk-level impact somewhere in the sequence. This explosion might also help us understand the timeline of the movie, because whoever is driving this tank is eventually gonna crash it straight into this building. And since later we see this old woman, then a guard, and then an officer all getting mind-controlled, it's pretty safe to assume Sadie's character is somewhere nearby and she's the one causing all of this. Also, this is the same tank Spidey was chasing earlier, the exact one Frank tried to stop him from pursuing, which could mean Frank is somehow involved in Sadie's plan as well, or at the very least he knows more than Peter does. Also, if it was indeed Sadie mind-controlling this confused old woman and using her to drive this tank into this facility, then that also explains why the tank wasn't trying to directly kill Spider-Man. It was only targeting his webbing, as I showed you already. And it's a very important clue, because it implies Sadie's character cannot be a villain. If she truly wanted Spider-Man dead, she would have gone for the kill, or at least tried to. But instead, every move she made seems designed to escape from Spidey. We then see Tremel Tillman, who's probably playing the main leader of DODC. And at least from this trailer, he seems to be on fairly good terms with Spider-Man. But rumors are he could be playing a villain. Precisely William Metzgar, a known anti-mutant activist who first appeared in X-Men Children of Adam #1. Now Metzgar hasn't exactly done a whole lot in the comics, but one of the few major things tied to him is that he was involved in abducting Jean Grey, which is all the more proof that Tillman could be the one holding Sadie hostage. Cut to Peter's apartment, the same place where we saw Peter standing earlier, but this time it's Sadie Sink's character. And that is terrifying for multiple reasons. Because if she managed to reach Peter's apartment, then that could mean Doctor Strange's spell didn't work on her. And that shows just how incredibly powerful she is. And out of all places, she somehow makes it into Peter's personal lab, the one place where Peter could be hiding every secret about his life, the letter for MJ, traces of his old identity, reminders of everything he's lost, basically the entire truth of who he used to be. Let me throw out a wild theory out here that might actually make your head spin. If Sadie is really playing Jean Grey, and if Peter fully succumbs to his spider mutation by the end of the film, then it may actually be Jean who brings Peter Parker back. Because by this point, she may be the only person left who knows all of his secrets. Then we see Michael Mando's Scorpion, aka Mac Gurgan, who we last saw all the way back in Homecoming in a prison. He's not only out in the open, but he's also walking around in some very high-tech gear, which raises two questions: who got him out, and who's funding Scorpion? Also, if you notice the fight between Spider-Man and Scorpion, Spidey doesn't have the web shooters here. So this fight will take place after he has already developed organic webbing. And the line we hear Michael Mando speak, "Stay out of my way," that's actually not what Scorpion is saying here. They've done a brilliant job of not showing any actual dialogue from the film. It's all random voiceovers from different characters. We cut back to the chasing sequence where Spider-Man gets slammed into this bus. And let me tell you something, this woman sitting inside the bus would have made for an absolutely perfect Stan Lee cameo. Also, I love that because this was filmed practically, we can even see the shape of the shoe inside Spider-Man's suit. Then we get a series of shots that are essentially some iconic Spider-Man comic panels literally brought to life. Starting with Amazing Fantasy #15, where Spider-Man is rescuing a civilian under his arms. A slow-mo shot of Spidey battling Boomerang, which is taken from Amazing Spider-Man #345. And finally, there's this shot on the boat where, in front of police officers, Spider-Man fights another masked villain who has clawed foot blades. This is the MCU's take on Tarantula. And yes, this is another recreation of Amazing Spider-Man #134. I think we're mostly gonna see Spidey fight all these villains in a montage at the beginning of the film. As we can see, his mechanical web shooters are there in every shot. So this likely takes place before the mutation gets worse and before he develops organic webbing. Now for the next big reveal, we see a group of ninjas, aka the Hand, preparing to attack Spider-Man in what looks like some kind of prison or heavily guarded facility. We've already seen a version of the Hand in Netflix's Daredevil, and they serve a demonic force known as the Beast in the comics. They first appeared in Daredevil #174, and even though they're most closely associated with Daredevil, their influence stretches way beyond that, all the way into Spider-Man and even Avengers. The Hand was created by Frank Miller in 1981, and their comic book origin goes back to 16th century Japan, where they were formed by Kagenobu Yoshioka. Originally, they were meant to be a secret group of samurai fighting corruption, but after Yoshioka was assassinated, the Hand ended up getting corrupted by Snake Root Clan. Now, why is the Hand going after Spider-Man? I guess we'd have to wait and see, but for now, the rumor is the leader of this version of the Hand is a female character who carries a katana. But what surprises me is the condition Peter is in. He's on his knees with no mask and looks absolutely defeated, which tells us two things. First, the Hand clearly knows his identity now, and second, the stakes of the film will reach a point where Peter simply won't care anymore about his identity. Spidey looks so pissed, it reminds me of the same rage he had when he was about to kill Green Goblin in No Way Home. And I absolutely love this shot. Spider-Man completely obliterates the katana into pieces. Since there are no web shooters on his wrists, so it has to be organic webbing. He crosses both arms, whips his web from either side of the blade, catches it in the middle of the strike, and then pulls outward, shattering the katana into pieces. I don't think this is something Peter could have pulled off with his old mechanical webbing. So with organic webs, we're definitely entering into some uncharted territory in terms of action. Although, I wouldn't be surprised if Marvel and Sony are hiding something major in this shot. I mean, what if Spider-Man has already become Man-Spider and has 4 extra arms here? And the trailer carefully edited the shot so we only see 2. If he's firing webs from 6 arms instead of 2, that would actually explain how he's able to snap the katana apart so viciously. Once Peter breaks the blade, we get a look at his back. The colors on his suit pop up and it looks absolutely gorgeous. We then get a close-up of Peter's eyes turning completely black. But if you notice, we can actually see a reflection in those eyes. And thanks to Cryptic, it does seem like the person reflected here is MJ. And this would mean MJ will once again figure out Peter Parker is Spider-Man. Because if Peter is literally mutating right in front of her, there is no believable way he can burst that off like, nah, it's nothing. In fact, when you look at MJ's room, you can see newspaper clippings and cutouts of Spider-Man all over the place, implying Strange's spell might have made her forget about Peter Parker, but she still remembers Spider-Man. So she may still remember every encounter she had with Spider-Man. But now she's probably confused as to why Spider-Man suddenly disappeared from her life and stopped talking to her. And perhaps we will learn that Peter is now working for the Daily Bugle as a photographer who claims to be friends with Spider-Man. And that could be exactly how MJ and Ned start getting close to him again. Not because they remember him, but because they're trying to figure out why Spider-Man suddenly cut them off. So our boy Peter might be heading toward another heartbreak. And now for the final shot of the trailer, we see Spider-Man flying toward the Hand Ninjas, and the internet has already gone crazy over this frame, because there's way too much empty space on the left side of the screen just beneath Spider-Man, which very likely means Sony and Marvel are hiding other heroes in this shot. If you notice the eye lines of some of the ninjas, not all of them are looking directly at Spider-Man. Some are looking straight ahead, while others are looking a bit lower, almost underneath him. Only 2, perhaps 3 of them are going at Spider-Man, which really does suggest there are probably other people in this scene that have been digitally removed for the trailer. This reminds me of the No Way Home trailer, where the Brazilian version accidentally revealed an invisible figure attacking Lizard. And that's it. This would be my in-depth breakdown of Spider-Man Brand New Day trailer at 0.2 FebX speed. Trust me, I still have so many things to talk about and so many theories to explore, so expect a lot more Brand New Day videos very, very soon. And when I do drop those videos, I'm gonna need all of you lads to be there. So make sure you turn notifications on. But until then, let's talk about Brand New Day in the comment section. As you know, I read every single comment. So let me know your favorite detail from the trailer, your honest thoughts on the overall visuals, and let me know if I missed any hard-to-catch hidden details. I'm your Canadian lad, and I'll see you lads in the next one.